Okay. Hi guys. I apologize that I am unable to join you in person today, because I'm at a summer program right now and I cannot make it to our meeting time. But today, I still, recorded this video for you guys to learn, and I hope that you can still keep engaged in the class and learn with me about what we have up next in the revolution, in the French Revolution. Okay. So this is indeed our last class, and before I take the stage, Charlie should have taught you guys about what happened in the French Revolution, such as Napoleon, right? Napoleon Bonaparte, the rise of Napoleon, his dictatorship, his changes to the French society, and we see how the French Revolution began with a monarchy, with a king, but then evolved, turned into a constitutional monarchy, and then a republic, and then eventually back with a king on the throne again. This is the cycle of the French Revolution. So many of you people might say that, hey, doesn't that mean that the French Revolution accomplished nothing because it started with a king on the top and ended with a king on the top of the French society? Let's take a look now at the legacies of the French Revolution and why we call the French Revolution the most important historical event in history by examining its true impact on the European continent and in the world. Okay. So now let's take a look at the aftermath of the French Revolution. So after the French Revolution, as I've told you guys before, many countries in Europe were scared at what was happening in France, because if a king can just be toppled like that, then that means that in other countries with kings, such things can happen too. So many of the countries were very scared at what was going on. These countries include England, Austria, Prussia, and Russia. These countries are what we call conservatives, okay? 保守派. Conservative countries are concerned with preserving the power of their own king. Instead, liberal countries is countries like France, who were starting revolutions to tear down the old social order. But these countries, England, Austria, Prussia, Russia, they wanted to maintain the old social order by remaining, having a king and a traditional social hierarchy. So England, Austria, Prussia, and Russia formed something called a collective security situation, which means that these four countries are binded together. An attack on one of the countries will be considered an attack against all of them. And the alliance between these four countries is called the Concert of Europe. The Concert of Europe is dedicated to eliminating the revolutions on the European continent. They vowed not to let anything like the French Revolution happen again in Europe. For example, there were revolutions and rebellions in Germany and Italy, but they were all repressed by the collective security organization of the Concert of Europe. England, Austria, mainly Austria and Prussia, sent in forces to quell these revolutions in Italy and Germany. This picture you see here, this guy, his name is Clemens Count Metternich, okay, Metternich, and he is the mastermind behind the Concert of Europe. So now we have the conservative forces, right? The countries who want to fight against the revolutions. And when we have the conservative forces, we're going to also have the liberal forces who are going to fight for revolutions. So let's see how these liberal forces played out, how they fought for revolutions, okay? For example, we had in 1830, we had a wave of revolutions inspired by the French Revolution, because the French Revolution, why it was important is because it set a precedent. It showed that it was possible to take down a monarchy like what they did in France. So that inspired many other countries to do the same. For example, Belgium started a revolution of their own, and they wanted to kind of imitate the French Revolution. In Italy, a group called the Carbonari also wanted to start a revolution. They started a revolution. The Carbonaries were kind of a national 民族主义的组织，并且他们就是说想要去 unite 意大利，就是说就让意大利统一，通过革命让意大利统一。因为当时意大利是分成好几个小城邦，那些小城邦各个就像之前我们讲的德国，它小城邦各个都是在不同的那个更加强大的帝国主义的控制之下。Okay. So we have revolutions going on in Belgium and Italy, and also there was another revolution in France, very ironically. Okay. So next up, yeah, so there was a revolution in France. The reason why a revolution happened again in France was because the people were very unhappy at the king, the new king that France. This wasn't Napoleon. This was a person behind Napoleon. But yeah, so people were very mad at that king, and then they decided to revolt against that king too. So there was another revolution. So the point here is that there are many other smaller revolutions around the continent that were fighting against the concert of Europe. Okay, so we have the conservative forces fighting against the liberal forces. That was what was happening. But then all the revolutions of 1830 were failures. They were all quelled, repressed by the concert of Europe. Okay, so the revolutions of 1830s all failed. But that didn't mean that the liberal forces has been defeated completely, because after that, in 1848, there arose another wave of revolutions. Okay, so let's take a look at how these revolutions played out. It happened in France, in Italy, in Germany, and even in Austria, right? Remember, Austria is the center of the concert of Europe. Revolutions began to start happening even in the center of the conservative alliance of Europe. So this was something that's going on that's pretty bad, right? For the conservative forces, obviously. But again, in all of these countries, the revolutions failed. In France, it was repressed. In Italy, it was repressed by Austrian armies. In Germany, it was also repressed by Austrian armies. So Austria really is at the center of the conservative forces of Europe. Okay. Now, the revolutions of 1848 again all failed, but that again didn't mean that the liberal forces would fail. Indeed, in the revolutions of 1830 and the revolution of 1848, it does seem like the conservative forces won, right? They gained many victories against the liberal alliances, which were trying to start revolutions. But after that, they were going to have a new way to do revolution. So we have two terms right here, romanticism and realpolitik. Romanticism 叫浪漫主义政治，而 realpolitik 叫现实主义政治。So 浪漫主义政治里面呢，他们相信的是什么？相信是法国大革命的这些道理，什么 freedom, equality, the right of the people, right? So these philosophical terms about what it means to be a democracy. But then on the other side, we have realpolitik, 现实主义政治. So realpolitik stresses politics with realism. So for example, starting revolutions based on like alliances with other countries, starting revolutions through wars, and starting revolutions through reinforcement of local economies and armies. So before, in revolutions of 1848 and in the revolutions of 1830, what we had were all romanticist revolutions. So these revolutionaries that you see right here, they all try to start revolutions by using romanticism to kind of use these ideas of freedom and equality and justice to appeal to the people, and just like what happened in the French Revolution. But after the failures of the revolutions of 1848, revolutionaries are going to start doing things very differently, and they developed this idea of realpolitik. Okay, let's see how realpolitik plays out. And realpolitik is going to help the liberal forces of Europe fight against and gain victories against the conservative forces of Europe. So this guy, his name is Count de Cavour, and he is an Italian politician. He was the first realpolitik politician of Europe. And let's see how he applied the idea of realpolitik, okay? So what he helped with was Italian unification, so revolutions in Italy. Before him, there were these two guys called Carbonari and Mazzini, and they were both romanticist revolutionaries. They believed in doing speeches for the people, talking about democracy, talking about republicans, talking about these freedom and these ideals. And then when Cavour came along, he decided that he cannot rely on these speeches and these political propagandas to achieve Italian unification. So the major problem that Italy was facing at the time was French and Austrian opposition against Italian unification, okay? Every time Italian people try to start a revolution, usually it is the French and the Austrian armies that are going to come, intervene, and put down the revolution. So Cavour noticed that, and he decided first he will strengthen the Italian military and the Italian economy. And then he decided to form an alliance with France so that France would support Italian unification. And with a strengthened military and a strengthened economy, as well as the help of the French, the Italians, under the command of Cavour, were able to overcome Austrian opposition and eventually bring unification to Italy. So that is how realpolitik works. Instead of relying on speeches and pamphlets like what you see in the French Revolution, the realpolitik revolutionaries rely on making alliances with other foreign countries, such as what Cavour did with France, and also strengthening the local military and economy so that this country can actually be strong enough to have a revolution. Another guy who was an expert at realpolitik was this guy named Otto von Bismarck. And Otto von Bismarck was also a very great realpolitik politician, and he helped with the revolution in Germany. Okay, he helped with German unification. So what he did was first, he enhanced the Prussian army, right? Improving the Prussian army, improving his own army and his own economy. And then he declared war on Denmark and then won that war. So he gained many territories and money from Denmark. Then he fought with Austria, right? After enhancing the Prussian military, he fought with Austria and made them surrender. So what was going on with Otto von Bismarck's diplomacy was this. Before, during the Romanticist time of politics in Italy and in Germany, revolutions happened, and then Austria will send their troops here to Germany and Italy to put down the revolution. But what Otto von Bismarck did was he started invasions in Austria and in France. So instead of starting a revolution and waiting for Austria and France to come to put it down, he went out of Prussia to invade Austria and France. And with a strengthened Prussian army, Bismarck was able to win all three wars with France, with Austria, and with Denmark that he started. And through that, Otto von Bismarck was able to bring unity to Germany and success to the German Revolution. So today, what we've taken a look at is how the idea of revolutions changes over time, right? So French Revolution might be one of the first of its kind, but after the French Revolution, we have revolutions going on in Germany, we have revolutions going on in Italy and Belgium, in all these countries. And then the way how these revolutions play out were different. So revolutions is also something that changes and evolves over time. We have different ways to revolution, such as the Romanticist way to revolution and the realpolitik way to revolutions. That is kind of the idea about the legacy of the French Revolution. It left the people with this idea of starting a revolution, but then it didn't set a defined boundary on how the revolution has to be carried out. So this is the legacy of the French Revolution. Today, we basically kind of really delved into this idea of how the conservative forces and the liberal forces in Europe fought against each other after the French Revolution, and specifically how the revolutions under the influence of these conservative forces and the defense of these conservative forces changes over time into something different than the French Revolution so that they are able to overcome the conservative forces of Europe. That's it for the content that we have today. And congratulations on making it to the end of the WiSE curriculum. You have learned a lot through this course about the French Revolution itself, and also about what happened around Europe and connections of the French Revolution on the European continent. Again, thank you for all of you for coming to this class. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you guys learned a lot from this class. Okay, we did indeed cover a lot of materials through this class. I hope you enjoyed our content. Special thanks also to Charlie for organizing this class and teaching you guys about the genealogies of the French Revolution. Take care, and again, even if you have ended this class, still stay wise. Keep learning, keep reading, and keep being curious about things. Okay, I wish you good luck in your future study careers.